Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Sue Baker. I'm the director of the VCA, and it's really a great privilege and pleasure for me to welcome you here this evening. We proudly meet here on the land of the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri people, a meeting place for many generations of creative and people of culture, and we hope that we emulate that history. We honour their custodianship of the land here at the South Bank precinct of the University of Melbourne. And we hope that we can pay tribute to their custodianship of the land as we develop this site. The discussion today is central to many of these issues, and it's wonderful to have our panel here. I'm going to invite your hostess for the evening, Siobhan Jackson, to introduce the panel and to start the evening. So please, would you join me in welcoming Siobhan to the stage? Thank you.
I'm just going to be your host for about 45 seconds and no longer, I promise, because I know I'm not who you came to see tonight. But a huge welcome and thanks so much for coming. It's lovely to see such a big crowd. So tonight's Arts and Ethics event is being presented by the VCA and the School of Culture and Communication. And just in reiterating what Sue said, I'd first like to acknowledge that tonight's event is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and any other elders from other communities who may be with us tonight, so welcome. As Sue said, my name's Siobhan Jackson and I work here at the VCA and the School of Film and Television, but I'm also a member of a small project team who are busily organising a series of 4 arts and ethics events that will be taking place across the campus in the coming months. Tonight's conversation is the first in that series, and as you can see from the calibre of our guests, we're starting the series with a bang, so looking forward to the rest. All 4 events have been made possible through funds generously supplied by Melbourne University's Office of Research Ethics and Integrity. So a huge thanks to them for supporting such vital and engaging conversations. We hope to see many of you back for subsequent events, and we'll give you a little bit of information before you leave tonight so you know what's coming up. But for now, tonight's conversation, the real deal, the ethical challenges of making art about real life, with real people, in a world of real politics. And given the varied experience and nature of our guests, I suspect a good deal more besides. But I don't want to preempt that conversation. I'm just here to introduce the panel. First cab off the rank, James Button, sitting right here next to me. James is a former deputy editor of The Age, was that paper's European correspondent between 2005 and 2008, and has won 2 Walkley Awards for feature writing. In 2009 and 2010, James wrote speeches for the then Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, and experiences of which he describes in his terrific book, Speechless, A Year in My Father's Business. The book was shortlisted for the National Biography Award, National Book Industry Book of the Year, and the Walkley Foundation Non-Fiction Book Award. James currently works at the Grattan Institute. Our next panellist, Anna Broinowski, is a documentary filmmaker and author. Her films include Forbidden Lies, Aim High in Creation, a personal favourite of mine, Helen's War, and Sexing the Label. She's won 3 AFI Awards, the Rome Film Festival's Cult Prize, a Walkley Award, the St Petersburg Film Critic Award, Best Director at Films de Femme, and the Writers Guild of America's Best Non-Fiction Screenplay. Anna's first book, The Director is the Commander, about her recent adventures inside the North Korean propaganda film industry, was published this year. And I think you can hear her talking about that at the Melbourne Writers' Festival next Saturday. And last, but far from least, Peter Singer. Peter is the Ira W. DeCamp Professor of Bioethics in the University Centre for Human Values at Princeton University and a Laureate Professor here at the University of Melbourne. His books include Animal Liberation, Practical Ethics, The Life You Can Save, The Point of View of the Universe, and The Most Good You Can Do. In 2014, the Gottlieb Duttweiler Institute ranked him 3rd on its list of global thought leaders, and Time has included him amongst the world's 100 most influential people. In 2012, Peter was made a companion to the Order of Australia. And guiding these 3 very adventurous thinkers tonight is the wonderful Jonathan Green on the far side. Many of you, I'm sure, as I do, listen to Jonathan on Sunday mornings in his capacity as the host of Radio National's Sunday Extra program. And anyone listening this weekend will know that Jonathan had a pretty interesting weekend. Jonathan has been a journalist since the 1970s, working at just about every daily newspaper Australia has to offer. He moved from hard copy to digital when he became the online editor of Crikey, before moving across to the ABC's online offering, The Drum. Jonathan is also editor of Meanjin, one of Australia's oldest and most respected literary journals. So a huge welcome to you all. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us tonight. And with that, I'm going to hand all over to Jonathan. Let the conversation begin. Thank you.
I think we should start with the big picture. All right? We'll get down to tin tacks of making stuff and relationships in that. But let's begin with the universe of art and creation. Making art, making stuff which sort of leads public conversation, which has that really challenging role culturally of being adventurous. Shall I do something with this to stop me feeding back? No? Peter, does that important role of artistic creation, of artistic stuff, that leading of social conversation, does that sort of give the artist a moral blank check?
No, I certainly don't think it gives the artist a moral blank check. I don't think anybody in any circumstances gets a moral blank check, really. The morality of what you do is always there, and nobody is immune from it. People often talk about the idea of getting a blank check as if to say, well, there are some rules that don't apply. And I think it's true that where the consequences of what you're doing are very great, then there may be some rules which it's defensible to violate in order to achieve those very important consequences. But that's not to say you get a moral blank check. That's rather to say, if the consequences of what you're doing are really, really good and really, really important, then they will outweigh some smaller harms or violations along the way.
So the work has to be good enough.
The work has to be good enough, not only artistically good enough, but it has to be sufficiently important in what it's seeking to achieve. And then maybe you can justify some kinds of bendings of the rules, but we need to really talk about specifically what, I suppose.
Sure. Anna, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I completely endorse that, and I think that what you're putting out there, Peter, straight away is the propagandist argument, which is the end justifies the means, in a way. If that, well, just to relate to what I do, or what Michael Moore did with Roger and Me, you could argue that that film was ethically problematic in that the whole... Has everyone seen Roger and Me? Yeah,
no, I haven't, sorry.
Okay, so it's Michael Moore's attempt to get an interview with Roger Smith, who was then the CEO of General Motors in Flint, and he spends the whole movie as a kind of Joe Sixpack everyman fighting for the little guy because Roger's closed down the General Motors plant. And the whole thing becomes Michael's quest to talk to Roger, who's this capitalist tycoon who doesn't care. Now, the point is, ethically, Michael Moore actually did interview Roger 3 times and omitted it from the film. But I would say that the ends justify the means here for me. Other people probably would not, and I wouldn't have done that myself. But frankly, he made a brilliant piece about the evils of free market capitalism running amok and what it does, and it was a massive film at the time. So to me, that's an example.
And that's one interesting example too of a creative person's personal behaviour in relation to their work. I mean, to give it, I mean, this is a terrible high ball here for you, James, but other aspects...
Like a hospital handpass?
Pretty much. Other aspects of personal artistic behaviour. For example, Rolf Harris is a fairly unseemly person who's done some despicable things.
But no one can beat his version of Tiny Down Sport, is that what you're saying?
Precisely my point. Can we listen to that with enjoyment?
You find these things out later, don't you? You know.
I've got to say that my first record I ever had was Jake the Peg.
Oh, right. I was going to say my first record was Gary Glitter, you know, and look at how he turned out, you know. Can I address Anna's point? See, I really enjoyed Roger and Me as well, but I didn't know that he had interviewed Roger Smith 3 times, and for me that's a bit of a deal breaker. You know, he lied. You know, and so
what does that lie do to the ultimate message of the film?
It just makes me not trust the teller, because there's obviously he wants to get Roger Smith, right? So it makes it. I think he could have told us that he had interviewed him 3 times. He could have included some of that footage in the film, and still done a very powerful film about the evils of contemporary capitalism. I think it's really important to trust the teller, and I love writers where I'm reading them and I feel like I trust this person. And often the trust comes from their willingness to entertain the other side, you know, and then to come still to hold a strong view at the end, but to consider the opposing point of view. And I'm not sure Mike Moore has done that in this case.
I mean, that's particularly true, and with a particular kind of documentary, of fact-based storytelling. In other areas of creative endeavour, do you still need that issue of trust? Do you have to have a sense of the credibility of the person?
You're talking about non-doco making, so artists or any other field of art, directing, writing.
Activity. I mean, is there a...
Well, you know, it's really interesting that your reaction straight away is that was unethical and I don't like what he did, and I totally understand. You're the journalist here on this panel, and journalists have a universal code of ethics, basically enshrined for the United Nations. Documentary makers, we have a kind of get home free pass in a way that we don't have a code of ethics. It's a very subjective medium that we work in, and we each draw our individual subjective bar on what is acceptable, what isn't ethically. My test has come down to alcohol, basically. If my subject at the end of my documentary watches it and will still have a drink with me, even if they're pissed off with me, then I've passed my ethical test. And that's happened every single time, thank God, touch wood. I'm not sure if it's going to happen with Pauline Hanson, who I'm filming right now. I hope it does.
And would Roger Smith have had a drink with Michael Moore after the film?
No, I very much doubt it. But, you know, at the same time, I'm a massive admirer of Michael Moore as a reverse propagandist, which probably makes me ethically very dodgy, because I actually really admire what Michael Moore has done. And in his defence, some of what Roger Smith said to him in these other interviews were irrelevant. And also the film that exposed him as having interviewed Roger 3 times was a terribly earnest film called Manufacturing Dissent by a pair of Canadians. Need I say anything more? Sorry if I'm causing any offence. Why did the Canadian cross the road to get to the middle? And that film was boring. So there they were, trying to change our attitude to Michael Moore and be political in some way, but their ends did not justify the means. They were so earnest, they didn't reach the audience. So, long way of coming back to your question. To me, it's still about the ends. Now, are you going to create, if you're a playwright, an adaptation of Chekhov to entertain the ideological state apparatus, you know, to entertain and enable power, which is what the big budget theatre companies do, or are you going to speak the truth to power? And that's where the ethics for me is actually about the end result. It's not about how you do it.
But if the ideological state apparatus is real and
Sorry,
it's there...
throwing alphas there, but, you know, why not?
Or, you know, if you want to make a film highlighting the iniquities of contemporary capitalism, it's all there for you. You don't need to make anything up. You just go and make the story about what is.
Yeah, look, I'm not here to... I wouldn't have done what Michael Moore did, but I guess, you know, I'll throw it back to you, but the question I'm really interested in is it ethical anymore in this day and age with the planet dying to make art that doesn't somehow have a political message? Is it ethical to simply entertain anymore?
That's a question that goes beyond the conversation around the planet. I mean, that's been a long-term question of all art being political, but should all art be political? I mean, that's... You began with ends and means.
Yes, and I'm interested that Anna sort of almost out-ended me because I share some of the James's reservations about, you know, and I would have thought actually that if you really get discredited, then that's going to harm you in the long run.
And it has harmed Michael.
So that's an issue. But getting back to, I think this is an interesting issue about whether art has to have some political or social purpose. And maybe we've got an unrepresentative panel here. I mean, because I would have wanted to argue that it should, that if we're going to justify it as something we want to put our energy and our skills and our resources into, that we want to dedicate our life to, and for that matter, want to raise money in order to be able to do, it can't just be this is art for art's sake, and doesn't matter that there are 1 billion people in poverty and millions of kids die each year from preventable diseases, or that we're stuffing up the climate of the planet for centuries to come. As long as I've made something beautiful or artistically interesting, that's enough justification.
What if something beautiful and artistically interesting is intrinsically of itself is sufficient to elevate the consciousness in a way that it also takes you to a better position on a range of those more immediate and pressing and direct issues? You have the sort of consciousness, the sort of mind that makes you better disposed to saving the planet as well. Do you need to be hit over the head with that as a direct
No, you may not
polemic?
need to be directly hit over the head with it, but I would want to see some evidence that producing this type of work of art is likely to lead people to actually be more inspired to do something or other, whether it's good for the planet or good for the poor or good for animals or whoever it is that we're trying to help. I'm just sceptical. That's a very easy claim to throw out, that, if we elevate our consciousness, then we'll all behave better in these ways. But does it really happen?
If all art, though, James, were simply pushing a political message, we'd be in North Korea, wouldn't we?
It'd be bored, that's for sure.
I don't agree.
Well, it depends how we define political message, I guess.
Yeah.
But
flesh that out. I mean, is there a necessity to? I mean, as a journalist, you would be wary of that. In the journalistic craft is to avoid that sort of obviousness.
Yeah, I think. I take Peter's point about great books or journalism or documentaries should tell us what is happening in the world, and it should open our minds and our hearts. I just finished reading a book called Between the World and Me, and it's by a guy called Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's an African-American writer. And he writes about the experience of being African-American in America today, incredibly powerfully. And I lived in New York for a year and a half, and while I was there, I thought a lot about because there's such a powerful presence in New York, African-American life and culture. But I realised when I read this book that I knew absolutely nothing, until so his story has kind of, by being just a very powerful story about how he sees the world, as a letter to his son, to his 12-year-old son, 14-year-old son. Is that, it's a piece of art, it's opened my horizon somehow.
Was it framed polemically, or is it?
Yeah, it's very polemical. It's very polemical. But I think any story that can make us see the world through other people's eyes, and that's a very wide range of stories, is to be celebrated, I think, if it genuinely puts us in the shoes of other people. And that's not a directly political agenda, but it's a kind of, it's a broadening of the imagination.
I mean, that can be done in a myriad of ways.
A myriad of ways. I mean, I go home, I love 30 Rock, I mean, that's funny, right? That's not political at all, but,
I think it's political.
Do you?
Yeah,
Okay, there you go, all right.
So I think there are many ways of being political, and the reason 30 Rock is political, first and foremost, is it's written, produced, and stars a very counter-cultural woman, a feminist. She speaks for herself, and she has a kind of a girl crush on her kind of unreconstructed white male boss. It's brilliant satire.
That's Republican.
It's very political, that show. So I guess it's about definition, really. I think all art probably. No, not all art. Art that somehow tries to subvert or negate the dominant paradigm is in itself political. And I think there are many ways of being political. You don't have to be Kim Jong-il and
What is art that doesn't do that?
Well, you know, it's probably a case-by-case thing in terms of what are you trying to do as an artist.
We're here to make sweeping generalities.
Are we?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to do that?
You are
Even though I'm in Melbourne and you guys are known for being much more subtle than we Sydney-siders. You know, we're a bit brash as a rule. But, well, you know, I'm just so sick of the fact that 89% of all Hollywood movies are about white middle-class men.
Is that an actual number?
Yeah, there are stats again and again. And in fact, there are less women directing and writing films now than there were in the 90s, and that includes Australia. And, you know, let's also talk about your friend who that you were reading in New York, African-American men, people of colour, sexual minorities, transgendered people, you know, anything that... Here I am on a stage with...
which sets a very low bar for the political in art. I mean, diversity is a political act.
No, but you asked a broad question. You weren't just asking about films and documentaries. I mean, you just have to walk up St Kilda Road and go into the NGV. You'll find plenty of works that do nothing to subvert the political paradigm. I mean, they may be, you know, interesting in various ways. Some of them may be beautiful. Some of them may be rather difficult to work out what the artist is actually trying to do at all.
Truth is beauty, beauty, truth, doo-dah, doo-dah.
I don't think that's right.
Tell me why not?
I think, well, for obvious reasons, right? I mean, you can have a work that is beautiful that doesn't speak the truth. I think that's a nice little...
The beauty is not a truth in itself?
No.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, so what's beautiful?
Well, exactly. I think that's right. I mean, you know, but even if we did all happen to agree that something is beautiful, it wouldn't actually be telling us anything about the world other than itself, right? Other than here's a beautiful object which people will enjoy looking at for one reason or another. But I think what we were talking about was something that, you said, subverts the political paradigm or something like that. That's got to reach out beyond that.
What about, Peter, a beautiful piece of design, you know? I don't know, I'm asking, I don't know. A beautiful vase or a beautiful pair of sunglasses.
But very often that will just, you know, say a beautiful vase, which let's say is a vase that only somebody very wealthy can afford to buy, is actually reinforcing the paradigm, I think. It's saying, look, you know, if you're rich and you earn lots of money, you'll be able to have an object like this.
A vase that only someone with an exceptional imagination, an extraordinary gift for the physical craft of construction, the absolute apex of human endeavour could create. Does that not have its own intrinsic value?
No, that's a different question. That's different from saying, does it subvert the political paradigm?
Or is it ethical?
But if the political paradigm is all about banality, if it's all about films about white middle-class males...
It's not what
they can be beautiful white middle-class males too.
Yeah, absolutely. The more beautiful, the better, actually.
But surely the creatively exceptional is its own subtle undermining of, you know, the paradigm of the standard sort of politics.
Yeah, but it's been, you know, appropriated as a not dangerous type of art. It's been commodified, you know, these things that capitalism will put a lot of money on and a lot of value that only certain strata can afford.
See,
In other words,
capitalism is the enemy of beauty.
Well, but we're talking about ethics, aren't we?
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm not sure that an object of great beauty is... I think it comes back to who's the audience, who's buying it.
It might even be wrong, I think. If you put an enormous amount of resources and effort into producing, let's say, a small work of great beauty, which then you put on sale for some wealthy person to buy, then, you know, you could have used that time to do a lot of other good that would have affected many more people. Now, it might be that you're going to take the proceeds of the sale and you're going to devote it to Oxfam or something like that. That might justify what you did. But then that's very different from it as a work of art.
But are you saying, Peter, that person whose passion and obsession is to make that small, beautiful piece of art shouldn't be doing that? When that's the thing that excites them to get up in the morning and...
Yeah, I actually don't think that that's enough, right? The fact that something excites you to get up in the morning is, you know, if you're really thinking about what am I going to put my effort and energies into, I do think, perhaps Anna and I agreeing here that the world is in a bit of a mess. There's lots of things that need to be done to try to put it right. Hopefully it's not too late. And to remove yourself from that process in some way about saying, I'm going to lock myself up in my studio and make a beautiful object, I would question that.
So how then artistically, creatively do we put that right? Do we do that by everything having a blatant and obvious purpose politically? Do we bore it into submission? Do we?
No, I don't think it has to be boring, but I do think we have to think about the impact that we're having.
But the ethical obligation is there on the artist to have that impact.
I think so.
And you agree, I think, Anna, with that?
I don't think in good conscience. It's just like in good conscience, I haven't been able to vote Labor since 1992. I don't think in good conscience.
But in 1992.
You can...
What terrible outrage.
You can...
No,
I'm sorry, 2002. God, what am I talking about? 2002.
2001, Tampa?
No, just after. That was the tipping point. Anyway, I don't know that... I mean, being an artist in the studio is a first world... making film that's simply making film or art or whatever that's simply going to be bought by some benefactor in your own first world environment that has nothing to do with the fact that the planet is on this unsustainable course. To me, it's like I don't understand how in conscience one could do that, and I think that it's about the ends justifying the means. So it's about the audience. We need to make art, but we need to do it to create awareness because we're in danger.
If you had a film that you could make that would universally change awareness, that would be a monumental moment, it would outdo Al Gore, it would...
And be more artistic.
And be more artistic. Would that goal, that end, that attainable end of that piece of work, justify in the process the gross deceptions about who you would talk to and when, the way in which you'd constructed it?
I try very hard not to deceive people when I'm making them. Yeah.
I'm being hypothetical here.
Yeah.
If you could do such a thing, would it excuse a range of behaviour?
It depends. I mean, once again, it comes back to the subjective thing. But let's talk about...
Well, no, I want you to deal with that specific scenario.
Okay, well, every film I make, I wish it would change the whole world, and it never does, but Michael Moore does the same, Errol Morris, you name it, Alec Gibney. Yeah, look, I don't actually think that you could create a film that created mass awareness and change on an issue. For example, Super Size Me,
to dispute the premise.
McLibel, The Cove, Gasland, all of these films, there is a smell of integrity about them. You're not feeling manipulated. Michael Moore, you do a bit, but I let him off the hook because he's so bloody funny and politically he's right. Other people don't.
Well, you see, there you are. You see, you've let him off the hook.
Yeah,
ethically,
I do,
he's got a free pass.
Yeah, but I don't think it's possible to create a highly deceptive piece of work
that could have that effect.
No, I'm going to take that right back because let's look at Coney 2012. Coney 2012 became viral in the space of about a week of it being uploaded by supposedly a tiny amateur outfit. Does everyone remember that Coney 2012? Millions and millions of people, supposedly made by a bunch of amateur Christians who wanted to save the children from Joseph Kony from being slave soldiers. Now, the minute I saw that, and a lot of my colleagues in filmmaking saw that film, we knew that was not made by a bunch of amateur Christian kids in their early 20s. That was a big budget, very beautifully shot, very sophisticatedly edited, exercising propaganda. That was a highly persuasive film. And subsequently Kony was discredited and the founder was discovered naked, masturbating on a corner in Beverly Hills when, one wonders whether he was about to break the goods on who actually funded Kony. Many roads pointed back to, and I'm just going to throw it out here and not say it's true or not, but it was a pretty juicy conspiracy theory. Many roads pointed back to the idea that this was a CIA psyop and that, in fact, what it was actually doing on a mass scale was proving that America, the most powerful country on earth, can use this new media technology and speak to the new generation, the digital natives, and persuade them en masse, actually, to endorse another illegal invasion. So, you know, ends justify the means. That's an example of a highly deceptive piece of work that actually did persuade and go viral and reach millions for what I would say was ethically the wrong ends. And I much prefer Michael Moore for all his personal faults and the fact that he flies around first class and apparently is a bit of an a-hole to work with. You know, I'd much prefer to sort of, as a reverse propagandist, if you like, to throw my eggs into that basket, because I think that's what we're up against on many levels. Someone said you've got to go to North Korea to make political filmmaking, and God, it would be boring. No, look at advertising. That's the most persuasive example of political propaganda there is today.
If the film could save the world.
Yeah,
can
I mean,
we lie to
as
make
a
it?
philosopher, I won't run away from the hypothetical, right? You know, we deal with that all the time, of course. And so, although I will say that I think in the real world, it's very unlikely that you'd make something deceptive that achieved an important effect that didn't get discredited. But if you could make, for example, a film about climate change that was based on some false premise, but you know, assuming that the basic science of climate change as we understand it is correct, but you brought in some fact that was going to be very persuasive, and that actually led the world's leaders to say, okay, we're going to stop mining and burning coal and you know, phase out other fossil fuels, and that therefore made a dramatic difference to the damage that we're doing to the climate of our planet for several centuries to come. I would say that would have been justified.
But, Peter...
it's a hypothetical,
yeah,
right?
I know.
I'm saying it's a hypothetical.
I know.
No one
Maybe
gets
it's
killed
journalists
in
that
this
may
discussion.
struggle.
As long as it didn't get found out.
Yeah, exactly. Because if it got found out, presumably it wouldn't be
Can't get
effective.
found
If
out.
it could get found out in 200 years, you know,
Yeah,
that
or
would
50,
when
everything's
you know,
over.
like
50
what
maybe.
they do with their propaganda. Yeah, exactly.
You're disagreeing,
You
James?
would-
Oh, I'm not disagreeing. It's just the sort of relentlessly practical journalist in me goes, well, what would this fact be? And surely we need to focus on the example. And the problem with climate change, it seems to me, is how you can somehow grab people's imagination to... I think most people surely accept the science, don't they?
Yeah, I think so.
And so how do you...
Hands up who accepts the science.
Yeah.
Well done.
No, it wasn't everybody.
Good evening, Mr. Bolt. Lovely of you to come.
Yeah. Although I did read it doesn't matter. But I guess the task of making a great film about climate change is to, and I suppose Al Gore did achieve this, didn't
It was a glorified PowerPoint lecture.
Yeah, it wasn't
Sure.
I walked out of there going,
It had its moments.
we're in trouble here.
Yeah, it worked.
It worked.
Have you, as a
Wouldn't now, though,
journalist,
you'd
have
have to do
you,
something else.
in getting us, in writing the thing you had to write, have you ever burned someone you've talked with in the process of that? Have you ever betrayed, in some sense, someone who's participated in the story?
Every journalist has betrayed somebody at some point. I don't think I've done it a lot. I really hate the idea of doing it. I remember when I was working in the UK as a journalist, I rang up a journalist and asked her a bunch of questions for my article, and then I put what she had said in the piece, right? And she was absolutely furious. She said, "You just rang me up for a chat, you know, and you put it in." It wasn't particularly negative for her, but she didn't like that I'd done that, you know. And I suppose the thing about being a journalist is there's many unspoken areas. When you sit down to interview somebody, it's often unclear because people start, you know, being aware that it's an interview. Half an hour in, they forget it's an interview. They start telling you things. Is it always fair game to put everything that they tell you in, you know, and that sometimes depends on whether or not the person is a public figure or just an ordinary person. Public figures, I think it is, because they understand the rules of interviews. But an ordinary person in the street, you know, what is your ethical obligation to somebody who might be in the media once in their life, you know, and you're the person who's going to put them in. Though that does add another difficulty, I think, which is that a lot of journalists are actually very respectful of ordinary people, and it makes for a lot of boring journalism. There's a lot of ordinary people who are reported in stories, media stories, they're always good, they're always heroic, you know, they're always fighting a good fight, and you don't get a lot of human complexity in journalism, I find. And it's often because the journalist thinks, well, I can't, you know, I actually didn't like that person, or I found them obnoxious, you know, but I'm not going to put that in, you know. Or they said something very revealing about their family, which was fascinating, right? But we often hold back on those things. And so journalists often go off to fiction and try and write novels because they think then I can be free to say what I really like. I'll just say this one last...
Days they just write commentary.
Or commentary where they don't have to rely on facts. I once read a New Yorker piece about a refugee from Afghanistan who had made it to the United States. And she had been tortured in Afghanistan. She had been raped. She'd had an absolutely horrific time. The journalist wrote this long profile of her, and at the end of it he said, I didn't think that so-and-so was a very nice person. And I decided in the long process of spending all this time with her that it wasn't what happened to her in Afghanistan that made her not a nice person. It was just the way she was, you know. And I remember being astonished by this piece and admiring it in a way, because the journalist had been phenomenally honest, you know, in a way that you just never read in journalism. And maybe that's a kind of ethical form of journalism.
That honesty can dig you a pit. We can be too honest in this world.
Yes, certainly you can, and you don't have to say everything. You know, that might have been a case where the journalist felt that it was something that he or she wanted to say, and that it, you know, obviously made the article stand out for you. But yeah, there's certainly no obligation to say everything that you know, whether you're a journalist or just talking about your friends. So I think that's again a judgment about what you want to say and what the implications and consequences of what you're saying will be.
Where, Anna, does that journalistic sense of the intermediary, the simple conveyor of the objective truth, such a beast, where does that sit in your model of output needs to be political, output needs to have an argument?
Well, yeah, that's a broad question again, because it depends on the issue. If I'm making a film about my aunt and she's an anti-nuclear campaigner and she's decided to be a solo 60-year-old battle against George Bush 6 months after 9/11 and go through America telling them she doesn't care if they lock her up in Guantanamo, you know, what they're about to do in Iraq is evil. And I'm going to make that film. To me, you know, it's once again, I need as many people as I can to believe in Helen and what she's trying to do, as opposed to make a balanced and objective piece about Helen that may only reach a certain demographic.
Which would be the journalistic task, would it not?
Quite possibly. You know, the current affairs, well-made, balanced, every side given equal weight, the sort of thing the ABC will put on for an hour at, you know, 7 o'clock, which will reach people. But if you want to make something that's going to reach people who are outside Helen's world and who maybe think what's wrong with the Iraq War and George Bush is a great president, you know, and yeah, we should smoke them out of their holes. You need to be political by stealth. You need to entertain. You need to seduce. You need to use humour. This is where maybe doco makers who go down that path part with journalists. And it's not that we're being less. Well, we're not following the same standards, but at the same time, you want to do it in a way that's honest. So with that film, I put myself in as a devil's advocate so the audience knows what I'm doing. So I'm not lying, you know.
It's using those things, those arts of documentary seduction.
Yeah.
Is that honest? It's
entertainment.
Yeah, but is that, if the honest truth of the thing is somewhat more
honest?
mundane?
Is art honest?
Tell me your thought on
Or
that.
is all art deceptive? Goddard said every cinema's a lie. It's the most beautiful lie in the world. The minute you point your camera at something, you're manipulating it. So let's be honest about that. All art deceives. And then hold ourselves to account there. Is objective journalism actually a myth? Is it possible to be objective? I'm not buying the argument of the journalist you read who said, oh, it wasn't her rape that made her an unhappy person. I don't buy that for a minute. That was he may be right, but it was his subjective response to her, and my response might have been very different. So is it a myth, the whole idea that it happened in doco as well in the 60s, this idea of direct cinema? All you have to do is point a camera at something and somehow it's truthful, just don't mediate. Let's be honest that we shape information before we put it out there, and then hold ourselves to account about, this is a powerful position to be in.
Yep.
So are we giving people what would be best for them to know for the good of all,
So with great power comes responsibility.
Yes, that has been said. But just to follow on what there's a bit of a worry, I think, that you say, well, there's no such thing as objective journalism, and therefore there's no standards. It's all subjective, and there isn't a standard as to whether a documentary is truthful or not. But I think in our earlier discussion we agreed that there are things that are untruthful in a way. If Michael Moore gives the impression that he didn't get an interview with Roger Smith, and in fact he did, then there is a departure from something that's subjective. And I think good newspapers or magazines, you mentioned the New Yorker, do some fact-checking. They're not prepared to just let the journalist say so, that the journalist wrote it down, stand. Now, obviously, fact-checking is partial, and some of those things, including the line you mentioned about what did lead this person to not be a nice person. If the journalist thought she wasn't a nice person, you can't fact-check that, clearly. But there are other things that you could get quite objectively wrong. And I think
Well, I'm not saying to lie, though.
Right.
Yeah. Doco's that... Look, I just made a film about North Korea, but that I was taken to a room I didn't even know existed at the ABC called the Fact Check Room. And that was like having a tax audit. Do you know it? It's this grey room.
101 on the third floor.
It has no windows. It has people I've never seen before, and they come out of the shadows. And they weren't fact-checking me on North Korea. They were fact-checking me on coal seam gas, because a lot of the film is about coal seam gas, and the coal seam gas industry is notoriously litigious.
Those of you intrigued about the relationship between
never again. Don't put them in the same sentence, trust me, let alone the same film. But anyway, yes, and of course I knew that I was saying something that was completely polemical about coal seam gas, and I had to make sure that every single accusation made against that industry had been corroborated 3 times. And of course you have to do that.
I reckon if all art's a lie, then that's a bad place.
I was just generalising.
I know. But that's a bad place to begin with the next step of all art being political.
I didn't.
No, it's facetious. Let's not. That's just a silly thing to say.
Maintaining the thesis that all art is a lie. Sorry, I don't think that the beautiful vase we were talking about before is a lie.
All art is constructed. Yeah. That's all I was trying to say.
Okay, so we can construct politics. We can construct a message.
Yeah.
Can I ask Peter a question? There's just a hypothetical scenario. There's an aid organisation that does terrific work in Africa, and there's a journalist goes and does a big investigation of this organisation. It finds that its work practices inside are appalling. Treats its own staff very poorly, and it's not a nice place at all to work. As a result of this article, donations completely dry up to this organisation. I'm sure you've been asked scenarios like this 1,000 times, and it collapses. And so the work that it was doing in Africa no longer
So the work was good. The work was saving lives.
The work was saving lives, but it was treating its own staff appallingly. The CEO was a tyrant. Was was abusing staff, whatever. But the work was good. The organisation collapses as a result of this piece of journalism, this very effective piece of journalistic investigation. Mm-hmm. Is that good that that's happened?
No, I think it's a bad thing that's happened. I'm assuming that the benefits to the people that the organisation was helping clearly outweighed the harms to the employees of the organisation. I mean, they were people who were getting jobs who could have moved somewhere else if they didn't like it that much. Anyway, they weren't going to die because they weren't working for the organisation or whatever. So if what you've done is destroy an aid organisation that was helping people just to meet their basic needs and survive, and you've done that on the basis that people were getting, let's say, verbally abused by the tyrannical CEO.
Well, let's make it more serious. I mean, how serious do you have to get before it becomes...
Well, it has to, I think there has to be some sort of proportion, at least, not necessarily equal, but there has to be some proportion between the harm that the tyrannical CEO is doing to the workers as against the benefits that the organisation is doing to the people it's helping.
Who weighs the evidence? I mean, who makes the decision that we're not going to...
So the journalist is going to have to make that decision. I take it there's nobody else in a position to make it, really.
That's a vast burden on that journalist.
But the journalist has to be responsible for what he or she is doing, the effects of reporting on this thing. And if the effects of reporting on this is that, let's say, thousands of people don't get urgently necessary medical supplies and therefore succumb to diseases because of writing that report, that's a response. I'm not putting that responsibility on the journalist.
If the journalist just says, I simply report the truth and let the pieces fall where they may.
Yep.
I don't think that's good enough.
I think that position, Peter, allows that CEO to go, I can do whatever I like because I'm doing good over there. And can live high on their own sense of virtue.
Sort of like the Catholic Church.
Well,
Well, I mean, I don't think that's an entirely, frivolous thing to say.
My usual standard of facetiousness.
Because I actually do think there are limits to this. I don't think this is a blanket rule, but I think in many, many cases, disclose and let the cards fall where they may is actually a good principle.
So, for example, a good example would be the ClimateGate scenario that we had a few years ago, right? Where it was, I think there was something that was, I can't remember, was hacked into those emails or whatever. But if journalists reporting what's really a very minor blip, that some climate scientists are discussing whether they want to show this graph or not.
And that's the point. It's a minor blip, and a good, responsible journalist would report it as a minor blip. And in the context of all climate science. And infinitesimal.
But if you knew that was going to be seized on by opponents of doing anything about climate change and blown up into something with a skilled propaganda machine behind it, I would think it would be better not to report it.
But that inevitably comes back to somebody making that call, somebody having that.
Somebody has to, but you're making the call. I mean, I don't think you can just say, look, I just report whatever I can find out, irrespective of the consequences.
So if then, I mean, this would lead us to journalism, to filmmaking, that is going to be political, that is going to ignore the facts where inconvenient to the message.
Well, not where inconvenient, as I said,
where they undermine the message.
See,
I think in the real world it's very difficult to ignore the facts, and you're not going to, as we were saying before, you're not going to be a credible documentary maker if you ignore the facts. But there can be particular cases, if you want to put them up, where it might be better not to report on something.
It's probably about choosing the story. I mean, clearly the person choosing to take that from being a minor blip to a wonderful weapon in the propaganda war against scientists who want to do something about climate change was not the journalist, it was Murdoch, or it was the people owning the paper. But I think journalists also, too often, the press releases are recycled or little things. I would like to see an environment where journalists choose stories and acknowledge that maybe that story shouldn't be done, but that one should be, even if they're small stories.
You don't think this is a very dangerous principle?
Yeah, I think it's...
But don't you do that all the time? I mean...
Yeah, you do. Look, it is true that not everything should be... It's not the...
I mean, you don't reveal the names of child victims of sexual abuse, for example?
No, but that's a little different, I think. I mean, that's a case of protecting people in a way who are they're miners. And
Well, maybe this aid organisation was helping lots of miners too, who are now going to starve to death. That's worse than just having the fact that you were sexually molested when you were 8 years old exposed to the media.
I mean, the journalists who reported the Blip story, it could be also said that they knew that would get a lot of coverage because that was expected of them, stories like that.
See,
that would pay their kids, private school fees or whatever.
It's exceptionally tough and complicated. It's a pity to bring this back to journalism in a way.
Well, yes, we're stuck on journalism, I suppose. But
let's move on. Journalists, you're the good guys. We're the dodgy guys.
No, I don't think so.
No.
God, no.
I think
That's the first that's ever been said before.
Journalist is very corrupted, commercially corrupted on the ethics of the people making decisions in all sorts of ways, as much, if not more, as anything else. This point, though, and we'll come to you for questions in just a moment. So start thinking. That's right. There's more to come, you see.
We want to give them more laughs. Look at them, all looking very serious.
The notion of the political, the creative and the political. I still can't help but see that as being, sort of fundamentally propagandist. You think that's a good thing? No, I agree with you, and it's very sad because art, in its purity and in its beauty, is just in and of itself an incredible statement about life and what it is to be human. I have a sense of a ticking clock. It's just me. I'm worried. In this moment, there are things to do.
In this moment, at this time on this planet. Depressingly so. We don't have the time anymore to make beautiful wabi-sabi vases that exist in tiny rooms for only a very small few, and I share the sadness about that.
So the moment, that changes the moral, the ethical framework.
Absolutely. If we can solve some of these problems, if we can solve climate change, if we can lift the billion or so people in extreme poverty to a reasonably tolerable level, not necessarily to affluence like ours, then I think we can happily go back to putting our efforts into creating beautiful works of art.
If we haven't compromised ourselves along the way, and to such an extent that our position is irretrievable.
Maybe we're compromising ourselves along the way right now by just turning our backs on people with great needs, and sort of we're somehow aware of this fact, but we choose not to take it into account in what we're doing with our everyday lives.
But it's a bit of a false division, isn't it? Because the person making the lovely vase could also be living, environmentally soundly. We don't want everybody to be telling stories about how bad things are. There's plenty of good storytellers. You're one of them, Peter, who do that. And I think I don't think there's a. I don't see the trade-off here. I think, and people are going to want to make a beautiful vase. They're just going to want to do that, and it's going to keep happening. And I'm not sure we can tell them that they shouldn't be doing that.
No, look, I mean, in a way, I've overstated a little. There are very few saints in the world. Very few people like Paul Farmer, say the doctor who went to Haiti and worked for rural health and essentially dedicated himself to helping provide health services to rural poor in various areas. So there are a few people like that, but most of us are not, and I'm certainly not like that. And so, yes, I do things that are not helping the world. And in that sense, I think that obviously people are entitled to express their artistic interests and spirits and so on in various ways. But it's more a question of whether that's something that you want to actually make your career, make the point of your life, the point of your existence, and whether that's something that we as a society ought to support and encourage people in doing that. And I suppose I'm saying not now, not in this state of the world.
And I think what inspired me when I was preparing for this was I couldn't quite work out where you're at now, but the utilitarian standpoint, which is, and apparently you've
still
moved
with
on
it.
from
No,
that,
no,
or you're
no,
still...
No, I've moved, changed slightly the version
Yeah.
of utilitarianism, but
Well,
I'm certainly still a
I
utilitarian.
loved that, and I don't remember, was Bentham one of them?
Jeremy Bentham was the founding father of utilitarianism.
So I hadn't
Yes,
really
that's right.
thought about utilitarianism from my undergrad years, but then I came back to it because of this.
Yeah.
For the greatest good that causes the least suffering. And that to me is the standpoint now, is surely trying to save the planet is something for the greatest good, trying to stop this reductive kind of last century mode of regime change and war is causing the greatest suffering, and therefore, yes, make a vase, but put the profits into something that will, somehow, to me it's about what are you fighting for, what do you believe, what's going to be for the greatest good versus suffering, if you want to be ethical about art and its function. And
The Oxfam vase is the solution.
buy a goat for Christmas.
Maybe not a goat.
But I'm a hedonist, otherwise I'd be out on the front line, but I enjoy making films too much. So my attempt is to try and create awareness in my small way about this bigger thing that Peter has identified.
Should we allow the hedonistic
hedonism?
construction of films in such a time of crisis? Is that a...
Certainly, if it's reducing suffering and increasing happiness worldwide, and not just for the audience of the film, yes, absolutely.
It's your turn out there, I think. Oh, that was quick.
Can I just get back to the vase for a minute? I don't understand, Peter, why you assumed the vase was an expensive vase. I mean, it could have been a beautiful little vase that cost $3.
Could have been.
Why was the assumption that it had to be enormously only wealthy people could have bought it? I just thought that was a strange assumption.
Can I jump in?
It just made it a useful example. If it was a very simple vase,
And given that all proceeds for the sale of vases are now going to Oxfam.
Well, they certainly are.
I really want to ask that question. Why was the assumption that it was only for the rich to buy?
Can I just jump in there, Peter?
Yeah,
No, not at all. I think the discussion is about there are forms of high art, if you like.
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't realise that.
Where, in design, in manufacture, in painting.
I think we were talking about what's up the road at the NGV originally, and then we got into this vase somehow. So I was assuming it was a vase that was on show there.
I'm responsible for the vase.
Its value was not necessarily monetary.
I looked at this glass and I thought,
Oh, that's right, we had that. It was the one Keats was looking at, right?
Keats. It was Keats's vase. That's what we've been talking about.
Grecian urn, that's right. Must be expensive by now.
Hello, my name's Jenny. My question is, if waking up in the morning and going to the studio to make art because that's what gives me joy, if this is not enough to be a responsible global citizen, then why should I encourage a young woman in our youth program who lives in poverty, drugs and violence to write and sing a song or draw a picture if she shows enthusiasm, interest and joy in this act?
That's good. Let's not all see the same hands. Come on.
So I think, it's a good thing to spread joy, and especially if people are living in depressing circumstances where they don't normally have much joy in their life, then there's clearly a benefit in doing that. So I think that fits quite well with the utilitarian ethic that I'm putting forward. That's something, and so I think we ought to draw a distinction between creating works of art, if you like, for their own sake. That's how this discussion came up, about the value of art for its own sake, and fostering the expression of artistic spirit in people who otherwise would not have the opportunity for that or wouldn't come across it. So there's all sorts of community arts projects that are doing that among disadvantaged communities, and I don't see their purpose as creating high art. I mean, they may incidentally do it, I'm not saying they won't, but I see their purpose as encouraging people in disadvantaged areas to have better lives.
I have a broad question which is about the different art forms and whether or not you think that different art forms bring about different ethical responsibilities. So performing arts, for example, like documentaries or music, perhaps are a little different to a discussion of a vase.
Anna?
I'm the wrong person to ask. I just believe in... I'm all about making this stuff for an end result. So one of the reasons I stopped acting was I was sick of being a parlour game or a piece of entertainment for the ruling classes. I was sick of being wheeled out there to make them feel good about what they were doing. I also knew I was going to go mad very quickly if I kept acting. And, you know, it was a real buzz to make a film and have 2,000 people understand what I was trying to say and walk out somehow enlightened or with a different view of the world. Which just keeps me in hedonist, selfish land, really, I guess. What's the question? What do you mean? Can you be ethical with...
Well, I feel as though performance art brings a kind of large-scale audience.
Yep.
So music is my particular interest.
Yep.
And metal music has been a particular interest within that. And
wow.
So it's complicated ethically in terms of lyrics versus intrinsic musical elements. And, you know, I think that's what I was hoping we would talk about, the complexities of art forms and the ethical responsibilities around that, because that is what challenges pre-assumptions about what's simply good and simply bad, which is different perhaps to journalism, but which sits within the realms of philosophy and art.
Yeah, I'd love to throw it back to everyone else. I'm just going to be really subjective about it, because that is my response to music. Some of the most powerful stuff I've seen on YouTube are musicians sitting in bomb sites in Afghanistan, you know, freshly bombed places. And I saw this just last week, a cellist sitting there playing Bach, and all of the Afghanis coming out and crying, including the soldiers and the ambulance people, and a kind of defiant act on behalf of everyone who was there, using music, which was the antithesis of what the brutality was that they'd just experienced. It was such exquisite beauty in this place of despair. So, you know, bring it on. That to me does create these ripples of resistance and subversion, and we're better than this. Yeah.
Peter, can I just take you back to your point about too much individualism? And let me use the example of the cello playing. And I'll shift it. I'm thinking of Rostropovich playing at the Berlin Wall, playing his cello, playing a Bach cello suite. That was written by an individual, written by Bach, but that writing of that Bach cello suite was a public act, as so much art is. The creation of a vase and of a poem becomes a public act. So tell me why that represents too much individualism. I mean, Rostropovich sitting there playing that cello was part of the reason the wall came down.
Yeah, okay, fine. Then it doesn't represent too much individualism. But the question before was suggesting that, using the Oscar Wilde quote, and Oscar Wilde is famous for the, art for art's sake, that's the highest morality sort of stuff for the artist. And that general attitude and the idea that if each of us, pursue our own passion and desire to be a great artist, that's fine, that's what I'm calling as too much individualism.
But I'm quite sure Bach pursued the aim to be the best possible musician he could have been, which is what gave us the cello suites in the first place.
I don't know enough about Bach. Maybe he pursued the aim. Maybe he just worked out well then. But you can imagine a composer saying, "I want to write music that will move and stir thousands of people for generations to come." That would not be too much individualism.
Can I say something? My understanding of art is that it's an intensely individualistic act, self-centered act, if you like, but nevertheless has massive resonances for other people. So that you do something that might be observing yourself, and out of that individualism somehow comes this thing that speaks to, in good art, speaks to many, many people. So there's a kind of paradox there that is the mystery of it. So I'm not sure we can simply pack it into selfish or not selfish.
Well, bad art speaks to lots of people as well.
Well, no, I don't think it does.
50 Shades of Grey. Twilight.
But when you say, what do you mean by speaks to other people? I mean,
reaches millions of people.
Enriches, did you say?
Reaches.
Oh, reaches.
Yeah, speaks to. And in fact, does good art anymore speak to millions of people, or is it only enjoyed by a small... Is it populist art now that speaks to lots of people, and great art that people hear perhaps talking about when they talk about, Bach or highly technical, high art doesn't reach enough people anymore.
There are still books and films and music that reach many, that are, and it's a subjective judgment, but that are fine pieces of work that reach many, many people. I don't think all artistic production has become narrow and elite.
I mean, there's probably a definition too that says that the extraordinary act of compiling thousands of words in a way that can be consumed by millions of people in an act of shared enjoyment, regardless of the literary worth of those words, is an extraordinary artistic achievement. It may be trash, but there's something in that shared human moment.
But look, while I wouldn't disagree with you, James, that there is some art that reaches a lot of people, but I do think it's also true that there is a lot of artistic endeavour, and it's often the most sort of highly talked about within those circles that are doing art, that actually doesn't reach very many people. That people will look at it and they're basically within comprehension.
Of course.
They don't really understand.
They all go to each other's exhibitions, and that's about it.
Maybe we should throw it back to the audience. Yeah.
Hi, I feel I need to speak on behalf of art.
You needed an artist on the panel.
Yeah, well, that's fine. No, it's very interesting. It's very instructive. Because as a painter and the head of a College of the Arts and as a board member of the NGV, I feel some obligation to speak. Because it is surprising and somewhat disturbing to hear characterisations of art that precludes its political power, because many of us in this room would probably think art is a powerful political tool, but it's clearly failing to get that message across in a way that is polemically apparent. And I think if we feel that the outcome needs to be too narrow, we should think about how minds are changed and how governments are changed and how consciousness impacts on decisions that governments make. We really need to think about the consciousness aspects, and if you look at the art of any century, in fact, but particularly the 20th century, the engagement in art, in the politics of the times, have been pretty profound. Maybe it's the failure of our education system, and I take full responsibility in this moment for such a failure. If this is not clear, because from my perspective, the utilitarian nature of capital, of the sort of late 19th century positivism, of the things that are, what in a sense creating a narrow view of the world, and I think leading to many of our problems, if that can't be overcome by some more complex understanding of consciousness of our culture, I think we're in a bit of trouble. And I think clearly it's a clarion call for us to articulate this better, not necessarily in an agitprop type of political message, but in what is it to be a community, what is it to have a sort of a social ethic. And for me, that is what art is about. And so I think we really need that message to be more greatly articulated. And, if I'm hearing that is not, in the domain of great intellectual minds, then I think we really need something done about that. And I take that on.
Should we take that as a comment?
Take that.
Yes, in the middle at the back there.
At least we've been provocative.
Hi, I'm Tony. I was going to ask a question about a word that a lot of people here come with the context of, and that's research. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering whether you have a point to say, you made quite a mention of the end, that the end justifies the means. And I'm wondering whether you see any advantage in good artists being researchers, or art having a research component, so that perhaps along the journey they know what the means are and they know what the ends are. And perhaps they get different perspectives on what those means and ends are from different people along their journey. So I'm just be interested in how you see research fitting in with this topic tonight.
I think it's obviously good if artists know something about the tradition within which they're working. That's clearly going to inform their work. But I'm not sure whether that particular question that you've asked is in the context of, as I understand, the VCA moving more to a university model in which you have to perform and people have to do research and get publications in order to get the right sort of points for funding to flow through. I'm not particularly in favour of that. I think that way of stimulating people to do research has led to a lot of people doing work for the sake of getting something published and getting those brownie points, and not because it was something intrinsically significant or intrinsically important. I think the funding model has distorted the research that's been done in the universities, and the criticisms that Anna and I have made of some kinds of art, I guess, can certainly be made of some kinds of academic research. I think it's essentially, a waste of time and not a top priority, given, again, the situation that the planet is in.
Just another hypothetical. What should an artist who believes in the emancipatory political power of art do if approached by George Brandis with a lump sum of cash? Is it ethical that they disclose that? Is it ethical that they rebuke George Brandis? Or is there a greater ethic in perhaps investing in your own career in the belief that some yet unrealised work of art will have some influence?
Anna, what do you...
Clarify the example. Is the money coming with strings attached? Do you have to produce the kind of art that Brandis wants you to produce?
Like a hagiography of Tony Abbott
coming out of a shell.
It's a good question. And from personal experience, I have received arts funding from the Attorney General's Department indirectly, and there were no implicit strings attached.
Just endless reporting.
There were a whole range of social constraints working within an organisational structure that really stopped me saying anything radical in the work, and so I ended up not publishing it.
Good question, though, Anna, away from that particular. I mean, that thing of, where the money comes from, should that determine...
Yeah, I think we should always follow the money. I mean, Leni Riefenstahl arguably made one of the greatest films of the 20th century, Triumph of the Will and Olympia, but widely imitated, wonderful example of cinematic art. She broke huge technological barriers in making this film, but it was packed with the devil, really, wasn't it? Shin Sang-ok is another one. Kim Jong-il kidnapped him, and he made films for Kim Jong-il for 7 years, including the North Korean Godzilla. I love your question because it comes back to what we as artists, and I am going to lump myself in with you guys rather than the Fourth Estate here, have to deal with all the time. We do not have a unifying code of ethics enshrined in the UN. It is a case-by-case subjective question. It's a moral dilemma, and everything that you do challenges you as a moral being. Am I doing the right thing? Am I choosing the right moment here? So I think it comes back to you. If you think in an ideal world you could take Brandis's money, do what they think is good, which is what the Russian playwrights and the Poles were doing just before the wall came down, and yet speak to the audience on a total other level, that would be perfect, That would be just perfect. You could get the money, but you could also completely subvert the hand that feeds you at the same time. Do that. Take the money.
Last one, I think, because we're about out of time. Yep.
I would like to say about the research. At the moment, everything has the word research attached. And many people, they went to study, and in terms of higher degree, they need to have a thesis. It means a book. And the end justify the mean. Many of them look at how to make a film from their book. And many people have tried it. And in terms of the Vietnam War, many people tried to touch it. So that many people, after they went to Vietnam, they went back, they wrote a book, but later on they changed the sign of the book. They become friends with the enemies, with our enemies. So they invited the Vietnamese soldier in overseas. It means that the defeated one to join the army. For example, like in America, Australians also try to do the same, but I told them not to participate in it because it's biased, unethical, and especially they didn't really experience about it. They only read books, so they publish books, and they now everyone use the word collaboration. It means that they will try to find the Vietnamese soldiers who are still alive, so make a movie about the Vietnam War, and I think it is a bias. Firstly, the Vietnamese soldiers, they didn't have enough English in order to read books, in order to understand the trend of a PhD books, and up with a film. Then a film, later on, it can be twisted. Once they participated in it, they don't have a chance to correct it. So I think art is unethical from the beginning until the end. People have motives. In terms of paintings, I look at the PhD one, went to Vietnam, they create a market and they try to control the painters over there. And the painters have to paint modernisms. Then what is it? It's feminism, it's gay, lesbian, a lot of terrible paintings. And it's not us, it's not our view, because the PhD outside, they went there, they opened art galleries, and they also control, it means they wanted
if we can just take an earlier point there. I mean,
certain people to paint certain way so that their art collection will be valuable in the future.
Well, let's
so art
try,
is always...
try and get an answer to your earlier point. I mean, the thing of going into work with an assumption and turning the material to that assumption is an interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I feel like I've been turned into Michael Moore here. I wouldn't...
It's the best we can do.
Yeah, but, I admire the guy, but I'm not going to do what he does. It's about authenticity, isn't it? I mean, you can't impose your own story on another group's story if they've lived it and you haven't, in all honesty and in integrity. And it comes back to what you were saying about research. Without a genuine collaboration, and I'm experiencing this right now because I'm trying to develop a film that for the first time goes into Indigenous Australian territory, and I'm no expert on that, and I am going to collaborate because I have no idea about this parallel universe that I'm about to step into, and so I'm collaborating with an Indigenous Australian in a very meaningful way. That's all I can say from what I do. I don't think, But what about...
I think if we've got more time, we should take more questions from the audience. I've got nothing to add, I don't think.
Well, I think we're...
Are we out?
How are we going? One more? Sure.
I guess I wanted some clarity on what the panel was saying about how documentaries can or cannot change the world and the influence of documentaries. If we could just expand on that. Maybe I just didn't quite understand if you feel that it can or it cannot.
Look, I think it can. And I think that, and this is, I've been given a lot of curry for this by various people, but I believe that in 2000, after the 9/11 attacks, when the you know, okay, I'm just, it's so obvious I'm a left-winger here, but the point is, when WMD were trotted out as a justification for the invasion of Iraq, that was a public lie on a grand scale. And I believe that as a result of that lie, the documentary became more influential than ever before, because there was a golden period from about 2001 to 2005 where people were deliberately going to the cinemas to seek out an alternative version of the news, because they knew what they were getting from the mainstream press was not necessarily the truth. And so that's why I'm trying to, and many of the films that were produced at that time really did inform us about what was actually going on in this so-called, you know, coalitions of the willings bid to free the women of Iraq. Doco's experienced a renaissance of influence, and from then they've branched out again. So now it's not just films like The War Room or whatever about the war, it's also films like The Cove, it's films about the environment. They come out all the time now, and they are still, I think, legitimised as a result of that period. As if they're done ethically and with integrity, they are films that can influence and change the way a lot of people think.
And can the panellists share with me what sort of documentary films they felt that has an effect to that extent for them in terms of...
Oh, I think there are many. I mean, I think An Inconvenient Truth did have an impact, even though, you know, as you said, it wasn't artistically a great film, but it certainly had an impact in informing people about climate change. You mentioned The Cove just now, which has certainly had an influence in making people aware of the dolphin killings in Japan. There's a documentary around called Cowspiracy about why are the environmental groups not talking very much about the fact that meat production, livestock production, is a major contributor to greenhouse gases. That's an interesting documentary, which, you know, I hope will have an impact.
There's one by Gibney right now on Scientology, which is an incredibly powerful look inside that church, which will hopefully, you know, change a lot of people's minds. There's That Sugar film, there's Food Inc. You know, these films are actually being made perhaps because the media has been to a lot...
Well, that's an interesting point, because it's sort of seldom bigger. I mean, I just instinctively, major release documentaries are a huge thing, and I wonder if that is that counterpoint to a corporatised, compromised media.
Yeah, I think it is, having hung out with those people.
Amy Winehouse, the film Amy, I don't know if anyone's seen that. Yeah. It's such a great film, and it's really about a fabulously talented musician who was completely screwed over by her father and her husband, you know, and the world, and the media, yeah. And it unpacks that so powerfully, and it was just the most affecting film.
I think we're at a moment of looking for that sort of simple human truth. That's,
I think it is actually really fantastic in a place that creates an awful lot of fine art to have people come in and talk to us about making real art in the real world with real people, and how very often that's very different to how we think here. And I think it's actually really important for us to be able to hear that conversation, so it informs the conversation that we have here within this college, which we don't often have broadly enough. So thanks heaps. It was really fantastic.
Pleasure.
And thank you all for your questions.